Hi, everybody. This is Nick. I want to talk to you a little about getting ready to see King Lear. As I mentioned in an email, it would be really great for you to read the synopsis on Wikipedia or anywhere you can find one. It's a complicated play with a main plot and a subplot, and it gets confusing. So do as much as you can to get ready. Just learn who the characters are and roughly what happens. It won't really be a spoiler, I think, for the evening. And it really helps you gear into the language and the production if you know a little bit ahead of what's going to happen. What I wanted to talk about is why we're using this play as a text for a course on nature and culture in the long 19th century. It doesn't come from the long 19th century, um, but it had a tremendous influence. Here are some pictures from the 19th century, probably reflecting stage practice. It was performed often through the 19th century. This picture is of King Lear on the heath, in the wilds, on the moors, we might say, in the middle of the storm, going mad with his fool. The fool, by the way, an appendage of many kings in those days, was often considered or called a, quote, natural, unquote. And here the fool, of course, is lying on the ground, close to the earth. The king is sitting on the ground, which is highly unusual, and his beard is being blown by the wind, as the trees are. This scene became an iconic picture of kingship destroyed or in contact with a brutal nature. Here's another picture of Lear by the seashore, contemplating the waves. You see the waves are fiercely, quote, natural in their production. Here is Lear unbuttoning his garments, his royal garments, in order to expose himself to the elements, something he chooses to do. And he's wearing this ermine, purple and the white with black spots, the kind of elegant court robes of the 17th century. But of course, he's stripping those off because he needs to enter nature in his madness and grief. Here's another picture of Lear, again on the heath, held by the fool, the wind blowing. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So it was a powerful play in the 19th century when they were considering nature. It was a powerful play in the 17th century when they were already considering what nature might mean. And providential nature, when the view of nature was falling apart, when that view of nature as part of God, as a symbol of God's order, was quickly being questioned and reformed. The Maybe we can best see this if we look at the subplot of Lear. The subplot concerns the Duke of Gloucester, just called Gloucester in the play, an old man with two sons. King Lear is an old man with three daughters. He's the main plot. The Gloucester plot concerns those two sons. Now, Gloucester is a providentialist. That is, he thinks, much like Lear, that nature should reflect the social order, the political order, the order of ongoing cultural life. That is, if we have created dukes and kings, then we can call that a, quote, natural state of being, and we can assume that nature or God does not come into this play for various reasons, but nature does. We can consider that nature should maintain that. He is aware that there are moments when that doesn't happen, and this speech early in the play refers to those moments. We don't see eclipses in the play, but we hear about them. He says, "These late eclipses, these recent eclipses in the sun and moon, portend no good to us." So he's looking at natural events and seeing them in a providential term. That is, they are warnings from God that something is going wrong. Now, the 19th century no longer believed in those kinds of warnings. He goes on, love cools. There are effects on these. These are predictions of problems. Love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide, cities mutinies, discord, treason, and the bond cracked twixt son and father. So this bond of nature, this bond that ought to induce obedience and care, seems to him to be broken apart. The, the events here that are preceding this are that he has two sons. One is Edmund, and he is a bastard, an illegitimate son, or again, a quote, natural son, as they called it. Edmund, an Iago-like figure, a schemer, a Machiavellian, has persuaded Gloucester, his father, that the other son, Edgar, is in fact conspiring against his father, wants to kill his father to get his inheritance sooner than waiting. So Gloucester goes on, this villain of mine, that means Edgar, his actual legitimate son, comes under the prediction, that is, the eclipses, the portents. There's son against father, king falls from bias of nature. There's father against child. He's just watched King Lear give away his kingdom to his daughters against nature. We have seen the best of our time. Machinations, hollowness, treachery, and all ruinous disorders follow us disquietly to our graves. So he thinks that nature predicts these changes and that all is falling apart. Well, what he doesn't realize is that all is falling apart, but it's not on the basis of nature. It's on the basis of his other son, Edmund, who looks like a smiling, lovely guy and is, in fact, the villain. Well, what does Edmund think about nature? Edmund gives this early on, gives this soliloquy, that is, speaks to the audience here, proclaiming that nature is what he lives by, meaning, thou nature, he says, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. That is, he rejects culture, he rejects organized society, the rules of society, and claims nature. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom, and permit the curiosities of nations to deprive me, for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines, months lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base? In other words, just because I'm born in a natural act, a sexual act without marriage, without official sanction, perhaps even by the same woman, by the same mother as Edgar, but before marriage, why should I be deprived of the benefits of that? Why shouldn't I inherit, in other words? So he takes on nature as his goddess, a scary thing to do in the 17th century. Edgar learns of this, learns that his father now thinks Edgar is after his life, Gloucester's life, and Edgar decides the best thing to do is to hightail it out of there. But instead of leaving England, he disguises himself, and he descends in a strange way into nature. He becomes a beggar. He strips off his fancy clothes and covers himself with dirt. I'll grime my face with filth, blanket my loins, that is, strip off my clothes, but just wear a blanket around my loins, elf all my hair in knots, and with presented nakedness outface the winds and persecutions of the sky. ... Edgar, I nothing am. So he rejects his cultural name, changes his name to Poor Tom, and becomes a beggar. He rejects language. He can barely speak later on, or he speaks gibberish, and it does not look like a human being. So, like many aspects of this play, Edgar hybridizes himself. He moves from culture, into nature, and becomes like the centaurs, half horse and half man, or half beast and half man. Lear, in the middle of the play, as you've seen in those pictures, goes mad and he rejects his own daughters. They throw him out in the middle of a storm, And the old man, 80 years old, is out in the moors in the middle of a storm. And there he cries, well, no, sorry, we're not quite there. Here in this soliloquy, just before he uses nature fiercely, misogynistically to curse his daughter. Here, nature, here, dear goddess, here, suspend thy purpose if thou didst intend to make this creature, his daughter, fruitful, into her womb convey sterility. So he calls on nature, as Edmund did earlier, in a harsh and perverse way, turning himself in anger, stubbornness, madness, and tragedy into the subject of nature, rejecting everything that culture has ever done, and turning it to um, to turn her natural life, her sexual organs, her reproductive means into sterility. It's a terrible, terrible scene, and there's more. When he finally ends up out on the heath, he cries, "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks, rage, blow, cataracts and hurricanes spout to you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks, and you, all shaking thunder, smite flat the thick rotundity of the world, crack nature's molds, and all Germans spill at once, all germs spill at once that make ingrateful man." So the natural act of reproductions, germs, nature's molds, rotundity, pregnancy, um, is all becoming cursed and distorted by his insistence that nature needs to supersede culture. It's a terrible, terrible moment. I won't go ahead to show you what comes of that. I'll just end by showing you one clip of a great movie of King Lear in 1971 in Russian, made in the Soviet era by Grigory Korsintsev, a great director, translated by the poet and author, Pastor Pasternak, and author of Dr. Zhivago, a wonderful novel, and with music by Dmitry Shostakovich. This is the storm scene. Wild horses, wild boars, wild music. Terribly distorted angle. Fool running across an empty plain. King Lear walking across the same plain. This, this nature pities neither man nor fool.